Captain David Reed watched the battle through his ship's viewscreen, his face calm despite the horror unfolding before him. Three massive fleets clashed in the void around the mining world of Kelter 7, green plasma bolts from Draken ships cut through space while silver beams from the Hive Collective's vessels answered back. The luminal Confederacy's energy beings danced between them both, their pure light forms striking at anything that moved. Kelter 7 burned below them. The planet had been home to 12 million people just 2 days ago. Now it was a charred rock, another casualty in the war that had consumed the galaxy for over 200 years. The human stealth ship Nightwatch hung invisible in space, recording everything. Every weapons signature, every tactical formation, every communication between the enemy fleets. The ship's computers analyzed battle patterns while the crew watched in silence. They had done this hundreds of times before, in dozens of star systems, always watching, always learning, never fighting. "Sir, the Draken fleet is pulling back," reported Lieutenant Maria Santos from her station. "Their flagship took heavy damage from the Hive's acid torpedoes." "Looks like they're retreating to Grid 7 Alpha," Reed nodded. He knew they would retreat there. The Draken Empire always used the same fallback positions when their main battle line broke. Humanity had watched them do it 43 times in the past decade. Every retreat, every advance, every desperate last stand had been carefully recorded and studied. "Any word from the other observation ships?" Reed asked. The Silent Watch reports Hive reinforcements jumping in from the Antares sector. The Ghost Runner is tracking a luminal strike force moving toward the outer planets. "All proceeding as predicted, sir." Reed allowed himself a small smile. The Terran observation corps had predicted this entire battle 3 weeks ago. They knew the Draken Empire needed Kelter 7's rare metals for their new destroyer class. They knew the Hive Collective couldn't allow Draken expansion in this sector. They knew the Luminal Confederacy would use the chaos to eliminate mining facilities that threatened their energy-based metabolism, what the three warring factions didn't. Nor was that humans had been watching them make the same mistakes for 50 years. The galaxy saw humanity as cowards. When humans first encountered other species, they had the technology and firepower to claim entire star systems. Instead, they built observation posts and research stations. They sold medical supplies and food to all sides of the war, but never picked a faction to support. Other species called them profiteers, opportunists, or worse. Reed knew the truth was different. Humanity wasn't afraid to fight. They were learning how to win. The Crimson War had started long before humans reached the stars. The Draken Empire, with their scaled skin and warrior culture, believed strength came from conquest. The Hive Collective, insect-like creatures with shared minds, thought unity meant absorbing all other life forms. The Luminal Confederacy beings of pure energy saw physical matter as a disease to be cleansed from the universe. For 2 centuries, they had fought and died and rebuilt their fleets, only to fight again. Entire species had been wiped out. Billions of lives lost. Star systems turned into graveyards. And still, the war continued, because none of the 3 factions could achieve total victory over the other 2. Humanity arrived in the middle of this chaos and chose a path that confused everyone. They established the Terran Observation Corps and began the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. Every battle was recorded, every leader was studied. Every tactical doctrine was analyzed and cataloged. Reed's crew had spent 7 years aboard the Nightwatch, watching the war from the shadows. They knew which Draken admirals were competent and which were political appointees. They understood the complex hierarchy of Hive Queens and could predict how each would respond to different threats. They had mapped the energy patterns of luminal overlords and learned to read their intentions. "Sir, incoming message from command," Santos announced. "Priority 1 encryption." Reed walked to his command console and activated the secure channel. Admiral Tora's face appeared on the small screen, her expression serious. "David, I need your current status report on the Kelter 7 engagement. Battle proceeding as expected, Admiral." Draken forces withdrawing after losing 30% of their heavy cruisers. Hive Collective taking significant losses but holding the orbital platforms. Luminal forces preparing to glass the remaining population centers. Torres nodded grimly. Civilian casualties? Estimated at 11.7 million and climbing. The Draken bombardment was particularly effective this time. They've been improving their targeting systems. Understood. Continue monitoring and prepare for extraction. The Council is meeting tomorrow, and your data will be needed. The transmission ended, leaving Reed alone with his thoughts. Tomorrow, the Terran Council would review reports from dozens of observation ships like his own. They would update their massive database of alien tactics, psychology, and capabilities. They would continue the work that had consumed humanity for 5 decades. Other species thought humans were passive observers, but Reed knew better. Every piece of data his ship collected was part of a larger plan. Humanity was building something that had never existed before. A complete understanding of galactic warfare, the battle around Kelter 7, was ending. The Hive Collective had won this round, but it was a hollow victory. The planet was dead, the resources destroyed, and they had lost nearly half their fleet. In 6 months, the Draken Empire would return with new ships and better tactics. The war would continue. Reed watched the surviving ships limp away from the burning world. Somewhere in the outer system, other human observers were tracking their movements, recording their damage patterns, noting which captains made smart decisions under pressure. All of it would be analyzed, categorized, and filed away in humanity's growing understanding of how the galaxy made war. As the Night Watch prepared to move to its next observation point, Reed received an unexpected alert. A Draken patrol ship had detected something in the debris field around Kelter 7's fourth moon. The ship changed course to investigate. "Sir, they're heading straight for Research Station Omega," Santos reported, her voice tense. 300. Personnel on board, all civilians. Reed felt ice form in his stomach. Research Station Omega was studying the effects of the war on planetary ecosystems. It was completely unarmed, protected only by its hidden location and the assumption that none of the warring factions would target. Human scientists. The Draken ship opened fire without warning. The research station's shields collapsed in seconds. Emergency pods launched as the station came apart, but the Draken vessel targeted them too. In less than 3 minutes, 300 human civilians were dead. Reed stared at the wreckage on his screen. For 50 years, humanity had watched other species die while they remained safe in the shadows. Now the war had finally reached them. His communications board lit up with incoming messages from observation ships across the galaxy. Every human captain had seen what happened at Kelter 7, the Terran observation. Corps had recorded its last battle as neutral observers. The time for watching was about to end. Admiral Lisa Torres stood before the Galactic Assembly for the first time in 20 years. The Great Hall buzzed with confused whispers as delegates from across the galaxy tried to understand why humanity had requested this emergency session. 300 species were represented in the circular chamber, but the real power belonged to the 3 factions that controlled most of known space. General Krex of the Draken Empire sat with his scaled arms crossed, clearly annoyed by the interruption. The massive reptilian warrior had better things to do than listen to human complaints. Beside him, Queen Vera of the Hive Collective clicked her mandibles impatiently, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights. On the opposite side, Overlord Prism of the Luminal Confederacy glowed with barely contained energy, his light form shifting colors to show his displeasure. They expected another boring human speech about peace and cooperation. For 50 years, humanity had played the same role in these meetings, the neutral mediators who sold supplies to everyone while begging for ceasefires that never lasted. Today would be different. Torres activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. Instead of charts about trade routes or casualty statistics, the display showed something that made every military leader in the room lean forward in shock. The Battle of Kelter 7 appeared in perfect 3-dimensional detail. Every ship movement, every weapons discharge, every tactical decision was laid out with precision that shouldn't have been possible. The recording showed angles from inside Draken Bridge meetings, intercepted Hive telepathic communications, and energy readings from luminal command ships. For the past 50 years, Torres began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, humanity has been watching your war. We have recorded every battle, monitored every communication, and analyzed every strategic decision made by your military forces. General Krex stood up, his massive frame towering over his delegation. This is impossible. Our communications are encrypted with quantum barriers. No one can intercept Draken military channels. Torres smiled and waved her hand. The display changed to show recordings of Krex's own private conversations with his admirals. The general's face went pale as he heard his own voice discussing plans to use banned biological weapons against Hive nursery worlds. Quantum encryption is impressive, Torres said calmly, but it has weaknesses when you understand the mathematical principles behind it. We've been listening to your private conversations for 15 years, General. Queen Vera's wings buzzed with agitation. The hive mind is impenetrable to outsiders. Our thoughts are shared only among our own kind. The display shifted again, showing perfect transcripts of telepathic exchanges between hive queens. Strategic plans, resource allocation, even personal fears and doubts were laid bare for the entire assembly to see. Queen Vera's delegation began backing away from her in horror as they realized their most private thoughts had been exposed. Overlord Prism's energy form flared brighter. Energy beings cannot be monitored by primitive physical sensors. Your technology is insufficient to track our movements. Torres gestured to the display once more. This time it showed detailed energy signatures from luminal commanders, including Prism himself. Not just his location and power levels, but emotional states, decision-making patterns, and even his individual energy signature that was supposed to be unique and undetectable. Your energy forms follow predictable patterns, Torres explained. Once we learned to read them, tracking your people became quite simple. We know where every luminal overlord is right now, including the strike force you have hidden behind Kelter 7's second moon. The chamber erupted in panicked voices. Delegates shouted at each other in dozens of languages, while the three faction leaders stared at the impossible evidence of human surveillance. How long had humans been inside their military operations? What other secrets had been compromised? Torres raised her hand for silence. The chamber gradually quieted, but the tension remained thick in the air. We know about your secret resource-sharing agreements, she continued. The ones that ensure none of you can achieve decisive victory. We know about the weapons development programs you've hidden from your own people. We know about the prison camps, the civilian massacres, and the deliberate prolonging of this war for political gain. She paused to let that sink in before delivering the real bombshell. We also know why this war has continued for 200 years. It's not because any of you are fighting for noble causes or protecting your people. It's because your leaders profit from the conflict while your citizens pay the price. The display showed financial records, resource transfers, and communication logs that painted a clear picture. The three factions weren't trying to win the war. They were managing it, keeping it profitable for their military and political elites. While millions died in pointless battles, General Krex's own words echoed through the chamber. Let the war continue another decade. My family's weapons contracts are too valuable to risk an early peace. Queen Vera's private thoughts were broadcast for all to hear. The lower castes die in battle while the queens grow stronger. War is evolution. Overlord Prism's energy signature pulsed with his recorded emotions. Satisfaction at watching physical beings destroy each other, pleasure in the chaos that fed his people's energy needs. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Representatives from worlds that had suffered under the war began shouting accusations at the three faction leaders. The careful political balance that had maintained the conflict for centuries began to crumble. Torres waited for the chaos to die down before she continued. 3 days ago, a Draken patrol ship destroyed Research Station Omega, 300 human civilians died. They were scientists studying the ecological impact of your war. They were completely unarmed and posed no threat to anyone. The chamber fell silent again. Even the faction leaders looked uncomfortable. Attacking human civilians was a line that had never been crossed before. Humanity has remained neutral in this conflict for 50 years. We have provided medical aid, food supplies, and diplomatic services to all sides. In return, you have allowed us to observe and study your military operations. That arrangement is now over. Torres gestured toward the chamber's main entrance. The massive doors opened to reveal a sight that made every military leader in the room feel sick with fear. Admiral Robert Kim walked into the chamber followed by 20 human officers in black uniforms. They moved with the precision of experienced soldiers, and their eyes held the cold confidence of people who knew they held all the advantages. "I want to introduce you to the Human Intervention Force," Torres announced. "Admiral Kim has been coordinating our military preparations for the past 5 years. He's here to deliver an ultimatum." Kim stepped forward and activated his own holographic display. This one showed something that made the faction leaders' blood run cold. Star maps showing the current locations of their military fleets, with human ships marked alongside them. There were hundreds of human vessels scattered throughout the galaxy. Ships that had been sitting invisible near major military installations, monitoring bases, supply depots, and fleet formations. For years, human observers had been positioned to strike at any target they chose. "You have 6 months to end this war through negotiated settlement," Kim announced. "If you cannot reach a peaceful resolution, humanity will end the conflict for you. We have the intelligence, the positioning, and the capability to cripple all 3 of your military forces simultaneously." General Krex laughed harshly. "You think a few hundred ships can challenge the combined might of our empires? We have thousands of vessels, millions of soldiers." Kim's expression didn't change. "General, we know the location of every one of your ships. We know their fuel levels, ammunition supplies, and maintenance schedules. We know which captains are loyal to you and which ones are planning mutinies. We know about the rebellion brewing in your outer colonies and the assassination plot against you planned by your own staff." The general's face went white. "Those were secrets known only to his most trusted advisors. Queen Vera," Kim continued, "we know about the plague spreading through your nursery worlds. The one you've been hiding from your own queens. We know which of your hive ships are infected and which colonies are planning to break away from your collective." The queen's wings stopped buzzing. Her compound eyes stared at Kim in horror. "Overlord Prism, we know about the energy parasites feeding on your people's life force. We know why your energy reserves are dropping and why some of your overlords are planning to abandon physical space entirely." Prism's glow flickered as his confidence wavered. Kim looked around the chamber at the stunned delegates. "We know everything, because we've been watching everything. The question is, will you end this war peacefully, or will you force us to end it for you?" Torres stepped forward one last time. "You have 6 months. Use them wisely." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, chaos erupted behind them. The 3 faction leaders were shouting at each other, their own delegates were demanding explanations, and representatives from smaller worlds were calling for immediate peace negotiations. The galaxy had just learned that humanity had never been passive observers. They had been the ultimate intelligence network, watching and learning and preparing for the day when they would need to act. That day had finally arrived. Commander Marcus Webb studied the tactical display aboard the human battleship Decisive. 3 months had passed since Admiral Torres delivered humanity's ultimatum to the Galactic Assembly. Instead of pursuing peace negotiations, the 3 warring factions had made a decision that would prove to be their greatest mistake. They had declared humanity a common enemy. The Draken Empire struck first, sending battle fleets to bombard human colonies along the rim worlds. They expected the same response they had seen from other species: panic, grief, and eventual surrender. Instead, they discovered that humanity had been preparing for this possibility for decades. Every human colony was protected by hidden defense platforms that had been disguised as mining equipment or communication arrays. When Draken ships opened fire on what they thought were helpless settlements, they found themselves facing military-grade shields and weapon systems that shouldn't have existed. But the real surprise came when the human colonies fought back with tactics the Draken had never encountered. Instead of meeting their fleets in open battle, human defenders used hit-and-run attacks, electronic warfare, and psychological operations that turned Draken advantages into weaknesses. "Sir, incoming report from the Centauri Defense Force, Lieutenant," Paul Martinez announced from his communications station. "They've successfully repelled the third Draken assault this week. Enemy losses at 60%, our losses minimal." Webb nodded. The Centauri system was one of humanity's newer colonies, established only 15 years ago. The Draken Empire had expected it to fall within hours. Instead, the human defenders had been holding off superior numbers for 3 months using tactics that confused and frustrated their attackers. The Draken weren't used to fighting patient enemies. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and quick victories. When human defenders refused to meet them in conventional battles, Draken commanders didn't know how to adapt. They made predictable moves, followed standard procedures, and walked into traps that humanity had been preparing for years. "What about the Hive Collective's operations?" Webb asked. "They're having similar problems, sir. Their assault on the New Geneva system stalled when our defenders started broadcasting counter-frequencies that disrupted their hive mind connections. Queen Vera's forces are struggling to coordinate their attacks." Webb allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had spent decades studying how the Hive Collective's telepathic network functioned. They had learned to jam the frequencies, create false signals, and even insert misleading information directly into Hive communications. Hive ships that should have moved as a coordinated swarm instead flew into each other or attacked empty space. The Luminal Confederacy had tried a different approach. Instead of attacking human military targets, they had attempted to drain the energy from human worlds by positioning their forces around inhabited planets. Energy beings could absorb heat, light, and electrical power from entire worlds, leaving them frozen and dead. That strategy had failed when they discovered that humanity had developed energy weapons specifically designed to disrupt their life forms. Luminal beings who had considered themselves immune to physical attacks found their energy patterns scattered by human technology they didn't understand. "Sir, we're receiving the go signal from command," Martinez reported. "Operation Mirror is authorized to begin." Webb felt a chill of anticipation. Operation Mirror was humanity's response to 3 months of attacks on their colonies. It would demonstrate to the galaxy exactly what 50 years of observation and preparation had accomplished. "Signal all ships," Webb ordered. "Begin simultaneous operations. Target priority Alpha, faction leadership." Across the galaxy, human ships that had been invisible for years suddenly revealed themselves. Not scattered observers anymore, but coordinated strike forces positioned at the heart of each enemy empire. The Draken Empire's capital world of Sanctuary was protected by the most powerful defense fleet in their space. Orbital platforms, minefields, and patrol ships created layers of protection that had never been breached. General Krex considered his homeworld absolutely secure. He was wrong. The human task force led by Captain Ann Foster had been hiding in the outer system for 2 years, disguised as asteroids and space debris. When they dropped their camouflage, Krex found himself facing a fleet that knew every weakness in his defenses. Human ships didn't attack the strongest points in Draken defensive lines. Instead, they targeted the communication relays that coordinated the defense fleet's movements. Within minutes, Draken ships were flying blind, unable to coordinate their responses or call for reinforcements. Foster's ships used weapons that had been specifically designed to counter Draken armor and shields. Years of studying their technology had revealed critical vulnerabilities that Draken engineers didn't even know existed. Human plasma cannons punched through defenses that should have been impregnable, but the most devastating human weapon wasn't their technology. It was information. As Foster's ships pressed their attack, human transmitters began broadcasting across all Draken communication channels. Not propaganda or threats, but recorded conversations between Draken leaders. Private meetings where generals discussed selling their own soldiers' lives for political advantage. Secret agreements to prolong the war for profit. Personal communications where military leaders expressed contempt for the citizens they claimed to protect. The Draken military began to fracture from within. Ship captains who heard their own commander's treachery turned their weapons on each other. Soldiers refused orders from officers they now knew had been betraying them. The careful hierarchy that held the Draken Empire together collapsed in a matter of hours. Similar operations were taking place throughout Hive collective space. Captain Michael Torres led human forces against Queen Vera's primary nest world, but his real target wasn't the planet itself. It was the telepathic network that connected all hive minds across the galaxy. Human technicians had spent years mapping the quantum frequencies that carried hive thoughts between star systems. They had learned to not just jam these communications, but to insert their own messages directly into the collective consciousness. As Torres' ships attacked the nest world's defenses, human transmitters began flooding the hive network with recorded thoughts from Queen Vera herself. Telepathic messages where she discussed sacrificing entire colonies to maintain her own power. Mental images of her feeding on the life energy of her own offspring. Emotional impressions of her contempt for the drones who served her. The revelation shattered the Hive Collective's unity. Drones who had blindly followed their queen's commands suddenly understood that they were being used and discarded. Lesser queens who had obeyed Vera's orders realized they had been manipulated into destroying their own people. The telepathic network that had been the Hive's greatest strength became a weakness as doubt and rebellion spread faster than thought itself. In liminal space, Commander Susan Park faced a different challenge. Energy beings couldn't be attacked with conventional weapons, and their distributed consciousness made them difficult to target. But humanity had learned their weaknesses too. Luminal beings fed on energy, but they also depended on specific frequencies to maintain their coherent forms. Human scientists had developed devices that could disrupt these frequencies, causing energy beings to lose cohesion and scatter into harmless radiation. Park's ships didn't need to destroy the luminal fleet. They just needed to broadcast the right frequencies to render them helpless. As Overlord Prism watched in horror, his carefully organized energy beings began losing their shapes and falling apart, but again, the real damage came from information warfare. Human transmitters began broadcasting recordings of luminal leaders, discussing their plans to eliminate all physical matter from the galaxy. Energy beings who had believed they were defending their way of life discovered they were actually working to commit genocide on a universal scale. The revelations that had destroyed Draken and Hive unity worked on the Luminal Confederacy as well. Energy beings who had followed their overlords without question began to realize they had been manipulated into becoming universal destroyers. Within 6 hours, all three faction military forces were in complete disarray. Not because humanity had superior numbers or better weapons, but because they had used each faction's own secrets against them. 50 years of patient observation had revealed not just military weaknesses, but the political and social vulnerabilities that held each empire together. Webb watched the reports flood in from across the galaxy. Human forces had achieved total strategic surprise, but they weren't stopping at military victory. Phase 2 of Operation Mirror was already beginning, humanitarian operations to protect civilian populations caught in the chaos. Hayes watched it all with a mixture of sadness and relief. This was what 2 centuries of warfare had created, civilizations so broken by conflict that they couldn't even cooperate to save themselves. When the last enemy ship either surrendered or fled, Earth's defensive systems powered down automatically. Medical ships launched to rescue survivors from damaged vessels. Engineering teams began clearing debris that posed a navigation hazard. The planet that had just fought off the largest invasion in galactic history immediately began providing humanitarian aid to the people who had tried to destroy it. Hayes received reports from across the galaxy as news of the failed attack spread. On worlds that had suffered under the 3 factions, celebrations were breaking out. Species that had been caught between the warring empires began forming new governments based on cooperation rather than conquest. The old order that had kept the galaxy in constant warfare was finally, truly dead. "General, we're receiving surrender offers from the remaining faction holdouts," Commander Walsh reported. "Looks like word of the Earth battle has convinced them that resistance is pointless." Hayes nodded. The last organized military resistance to human intervention was over. Now came the harder task, helping dozens of species build peaceful societies after centuries of war. But as she looked out at the stars where human ships were already coordinating relief efforts, Hayes felt confident that humanity was ready for that challenge too. They had been preparing for peace just as carefully as they had prepared for war. Ambassador Robert Kim stood at the center of the rebuilt Galactic Assembly, but the chamber looked nothing like it had during the dark years of the Crimson War. Gone were the separate sections for hostile factions and the military guards at every entrance. In their place were mixed delegations working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. 5 years had passed since the failed attack on Earth ended the last organized resistance to human intervention. The galaxy was at peace for the first time in over 3 centuries, but Kim knew that maintaining that peace would be harder than winning the war had been. The 3 species that had once dominated galactic affairs through military might were struggling to find their place in a peaceful universe. Draken warriors who had known only conquest now had to learn new skills. Hive collectives that had unified through shared enemies needed different purposes. Luminal beings who had fed on the chaos of war required new sources of energy and meaning. Kim had spent the last 5 years traveling between worlds, helping former enemies become productive members of galactic civilization. It was work that required patience, understanding, and a deep knowledge of alien psychology that humanity had developed through decades of careful observation. "Ambassador Kim," called out Delegate Tor, a young Draken who represented the reformed worlds of his species. "The engineering proposals for the Kepler terraforming project are ready for review." Kim nodded and activated the holographic display. The Kepler system had been one of the war's most devastated casualties, with 3 planets reduced to lifeless rocks by repeated bombardments. Now, Draken engineering teams were leading an effort to restore those worlds to HFY was remarkable how quickly the former warrior species had adapted to construction rather than destruction. Their natural strength and technical skills made them excellent terraforming specialists. More importantly, the challenging work gave Draken culture a new outlet for their competitive instincts. "The timeline looks aggressive but achievable," Kim observed, studying the technical specifications. "How are the Draken teams working with the Hive environmental specialists?" Delegate Tor's expression brightened. "Better than expected, Ambassador. The Hive collectives are helping us understand planetary ecosystems in ways we never considered. Their biological expertise complements our engineering capabilities perfectly." Kim smiled. "That cooperation would have been impossible under the old system, where Draken and Hive forces were locked in constant warfare. Now they were discovering that their different strengths could achieve remarkable things when combined peacefully. And the luminal energy beings are providing power for the atmospheric processors," Tor continued. "Overlord Bright has been particularly helpful with the complex calculations needed for weather pattern modification." The integration of luminal beings into peaceful society had been one of Kim's biggest challenges. Creatures of pure energy who had once considered physical matter a disease to be eliminated had needed entirely new perspectives on existence. The solution came from recognizing that their energy manipulation abilities made them ideal for large-scale engineering projects that required precise power control. Kim moved to the next item on his agenda, a report from the Outer Rim Development Council. These were worlds that had been devastated by centuries of warfare and were now rebuilding with help from the galactic community. "Director Walsh is reporting excellent progress on the new Harmony Agricultural Project," announced Representative Zara, a member of the small butterfly-like species that had nearly been exterminated during the war. "Food production is up 400% from pre-war levels. The agricultural project was one of humanity's most successful post-war initiatives. By combining Draken engineering, hive biological expertise, and luminal energy management, they had developed farming techniques that could restore fertility to worlds that had been barren for decades, but more importantly, the project gave former military personnel from all three species meaningful work that directly helped their communities. Draken officers who had once planned planetary bombardments now designed irrigation systems. Hive queens who had sent drones to their deaths now managed ecosystems that supported millions of lives. Luminal overlords who had drained energy from worlds now provided carefully controlled power to help crops grow. Kim reviewed reports from dozens of similar projects across the galaxy. The asteroid mining cooperative had former enemies, working side by side to extract resources without the territorial conflicts that had sparked so many wars. The interstellar communications network used luminal beings as living relay stations, allowing instant communication across vast distances. The Galactic Medical Initiative combined the biological knowledge of all species to develop treatments for diseases that had been spreading unchecked during the war years. Every project was designed not just to rebuild what the war had destroyed, but to create new connections between species that had been enemies for centuries. The work was slow and sometimes frustrating, but Kim could see the gradual changes in how different species viewed each other. "Ambassador, we have a priority communication from Admiral Torres on Earth," announced his aide, Lieutenant Commander. Maria Santos. Kim accepted the transmission, and Torres' familiar face appeared on his private screen. The Admiral looked tired but satisfied, which Kim recognized as her usual expression when dealing with the complex logistics of galactic reconstruction. "Robert, I have some news that might interest you. The Terran Council has just approved the final phase of military drawdown. We're reducing our intervention forces by another 30% over the next year." Kim felt a mixture of pride and concern. The reduction in human military presence was a sign that galactic peace was becoming self-sustaining, but it also meant that local governments would need to take more responsibility for maintaining stability. "How are the local security forces?" "Adapting?" Kim asked. "Better than expected. The joint defense initiatives are working well. Former enemies are learning to trust each other enough to coordinate their security operations." Torres paused. "There have been some incidents, but nothing the local authorities couldn't handle." Kim nodded. There would always be individuals who preferred the old system of constant conflict, but they were becoming increasingly isolated as their communities discovered the benefits of cooperation. "There's something else," Torres continued. "The Council has asked me to discuss the long-term future of human involvement in galactic affairs. We've always said that our goal was to create a stable civilization that could govern itself. That time is approaching faster than we expected." Kim had been anticipating this conversation for years. Humanity's intervention had always been intended as a temporary measure to end the cycle of warfare that had consumed the galaxy. Success would be measured not by how long they stayed in control, but by how quickly they could step back and let other species manage their own affairs. "What's the timeline?" Kim asked. "The current plan calls for complete withdrawal of human administrative oversight within 10 years. We'll maintain embassy relationships and continue some of the larger reconstruction projects, but governance will be entirely in local hands." It was an ambitious schedule, but Kim believed it was achievable. The species that had spent centuries fighting each other were learning to work together. New institutions were developing that could maintain peace without human supervision. Most importantly, the younger generations who had grown up after the war were building relationships that transcended the old ethnic and cultural divisions. Human medical ships were rushing to provide aid where faction governments had collapsed. Human engineering teams were repairing infrastructure damaged by decades of war. Human diplomatic corps were helping local leaders establish new governments, free from the corruption that had prolonged the conflict. The galaxy was learning that humanity hadn't just been preparing for war, they had been preparing for peace. Everything they had observed and studied was being used not to conquer other species, but to help them build better societies. As the Decisive prepared to jump to its next operational area, Webb received a priority message from Admiral Torres. The Admiral's face appeared on his screen, looking tired but satisfied. Marcus, excellent work. All primary objectives achieved with minimal casualties on both sides. How are your people holding up? Ready for the next phase, Admiral. The crew understands what we're fighting for, Torres nodded. Good, because Phase 3 is going to be the hardest part. It's one thing to win a war, Marcus. It's another thing entirely to build a lasting peace. Webb looked out at the stars where human ships were already beginning the long work of reconstruction. After 50 years of watching the galaxy tear itself apart, humanity was finally in a position to help put it back together. The question was whether the other species would let them. General Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of the human command ship Resolute, watching as the final phase of humanity's intervention began. 6 months had passed since Operation Mirror shattered the 3 warring factions, but the galaxy was far from peaceful. While the old military hierarchies had collapsed, desperate leaders were making one last attempt to maintain their power through the only method they understood: violence. The remnants of the Draken Empire, Hive Collective, and Luminal Confederacy had done something unprecedented in 2 centuries of warfare. They had formed an alliance, not to bring peace to the galaxy, but to destroy the one force that threatened their ability to profit from endless conflict. Humanity itself. General Krex had escaped the fall of Sanctuary and gathered the most fanatical Draken commanders around him. Queen Vera had retreated to a hidden nest world with the few remaining loyal hives. Overlord Prism had merged with other energy beings who refused to accept the end of their plans for universal cleansing. Together they represented the last organized resistance to human intervention. Their plan was simple and desperate: strike at Earth itself. They believed that humanity's homeworld would be as vulnerable as their own capitals had proven to be. If they could destroy humanity's political and military center, the intervention forces scattered across the galaxy would lose coordination and withdraw. Hayes had been expecting this attack for months. Every piece of intelligence humanity had gathered pointed to the same conclusion: defeated empires would eventually unite against their common enemy rather than accept the end of their power. Human strategists had planned for this scenario, but Hayes knew the next few hours would determine whether humanity's 50-year preparation had been sufficient. General, long-range sensors are detecting the Allied fleet, reported Commander Diana Walsh from her station. They're approaching from 3 vectors, just as predicted. Estimated arrival at Earth in 6 hours. Hayes nodded grimly. The enemy alliance had assembled the largest invasion force in galactic history. Nearly 3,000 ships from all 3 factions, carrying weapons that could crack planets and reduce entire star systems to rubble. It was more firepower than had ever been concentrated in one place, but they were making the same mistake. That had cost them the war. They thought they understood their enemy. Signal all defense commands, Hayes ordered. Execute Protocol 7, full planetary mobilization. Across Earth, a transformation began that would have shocked any alien observer. The peaceful world that the galaxy had known for 50 years revealed its true nature. Hidden weapon systems emerged from what had appeared to be parks and monuments. Civilian buildings converted into military bunkers with armor plating that slid up from underground storage. Transport networks that carried commuters to work suddenly reconfigured themselves into supply lines for military operations. Earth hadn't just been preparing for this attack. The entire planet had been designed for it. Every human settlement was a fortress. Every citizen was a trained defender. Every piece of infrastructure had been built with warfare in mind. The world that other species saw as humanity's soft center was actually the most heavily militarized planet in known space. Commander Walsh's voice carried a note of satisfaction as she read the incoming reports. All defense grids are online. Orbital platforms report ready status. Civilian evacuation to hardened shelters is 90% complete. But Hayes knew the real strength of Earth's defenses wasn't the weapons or fortifications. It was the people. For 50 years, Every human child had grown up knowing that someday they might need to defend their world from the galaxy's warring factions. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. General, we're receiving communications from the fleet commanders, Walsh reported. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Hayes smiled coldly. Put them through. The main screen flickered to life, showing three figures that represented everything wrong with the galaxy's old order. General Krex glared from his command bridge, his scaled face twisted with rage. Queen Vera's compound eyes glittered with hatred from her organic ship. Overlord Prism pulsed with malevolent energy aboard his crystalline vessel. Humans, Krex snarled, you have interfered with the natural order for the last time. Surrender now, and we will make your deaths quick. The Hive offers no mercy to those who poison our unity, Queen Vera added, her telepathic voice echoing strangely through the transmission. Your species will be absorbed and corrected. Overlord Prism's energy form flared brighter. Physical matter is a disease. We bring the cure your world needs. Hayes looked at them with the calm expression of someone who had spent years preparing for this conversation. General Krex, your remaining forces number 412 ships with an average crew efficiency of 67%. Queen. Vera, your hive mind is operating at 32% capacity due to internal conflicts. Overlord Prism, your energy reserves are down 40% from your normal levels. The three leaders fell silent, shocked by the precise intelligence humanity possessed about their supposedly secret alliance. You're attacking Earth with damaged fleets, broken command structures, and demoralized crews, Hayes continued. You're doing this because you believe our homeworld is an easy target. You're wrong. She gestured to Commander Walsh, who activated a tactical display that showed the true scope of Earth's defenses. Thousands of weapon platforms, millions of trained defenders, and defensive systems that had been 50 years in the making. This isn't just humanity's capital, Hayes explained. It's the fortress we built to protect everything we've worked for. Every lesson we learned from watching your wars went into designing Earth's defenses. Every weakness we identified in your military doctrines was used to create countermeasures. The enemy fleet was close enough now for detailed scans. Hayes could see the strain on their ships, the exhaustion of their crews, the cracks in their alliance that were already beginning to show. These weren't the mighty empires that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries. They were the desperate remnants of failed civilizations making one last grab for relevance. You have one chance to end this peacefully, Hayes offered. Stand down your fleets and accept transition to new governments. Help us build something better than the system you've been defending, General Krex roared with rage. We would rather die than submit to human rule. Then you've made your choice, Hayes replied calmly. Earth Defense Command, you are authorized to engage. The battle that followed would be remembered as the shortest large-scale engagement in galactic history. The enemy alliance had brought overwhelming numbers, but they were facing an enemy that knew their every weakness and had prepared specifically to counter their strengths. Draken ships that relied on heavy armor found themselves targeted by weapons that bypassed their defenses entirely. Hive vessels that depended on swarm tactics were separated and destroyed by coordinated defensive fire that broke their formations. Luminal energy beings discovered that Earth's defensive systems included frequency generators that could disrupt their coherent forms, but the most devastating factor wasn't Earth's weapons. It was the planet's defenders themselves. Human pilots flew with precision that came from lifelong training. Human gunners targeted enemy weak points with accuracy that seemed impossible. Human commanders coordinated responses with the smooth efficiency of people who had prepared for this battle their entire lives. The enemy alliance lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Not because humanity destroyed them all, but because the alliance destroyed itself. Old hatreds between the 3 factions resurfaced under pressure. Draken ships began firing on hive vessels that got too close. Queen Vera's forces attacked luminal beings that drained too much energy from shared power sources. Overlord Prism's energy forms lashed out at any physical matter that came within range. Kim ended the transmission and returned to the assembly floor, where delegates were discussing the establishment of a new galactic university system. Education was one of the keys to lasting peace, giving young people from different species the chance to learn together and form the bonds that would prevent future conflicts. As he listened to the debates, Kim reflected on how much had changed since that day 5 years ago when Admiral Torres first revealed the extent of human surveillance to the shocked Galactic Assembly, the same chamber that had once echoed with threats and accusations now hosted thoughtful discussions about scientific research, economic development, and cultural exchange. The three species that had once seemed incapable of coexistence were not just living peacefully, but actively helping each other thrive. Draken strength was being used to build rather than destroy. Hive unity was focused on creation rather than conquest. Luminal energy was nurturing life instead of eliminating it. But Kim knew that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their military intervention or reconstruction projects. It was the example they had set through 50 years of patient observation and careful preparation. They had shown that it was possible to understand your enemies well, enough to help them become something better. As the assembly session concluded, Kim made his way to the observation deck that overlooked the galactic capital's main plaza. Below him, beings from dozens of species walked together, worked together, and lived together in ways that would have been unthinkable during the war years. The sight filled him with a quiet satisfaction. Humanity had achieved something that military conquest could never accomplish. They had changed how an entire galaxy thought about conflict and cooperation. Kim's communication device chimed with an incoming message from Earth. It was a simple text from Admiral Torres. Robert, the last observation corps station is being decommissioned tomorrow. After 52 years, we're finally done watching. How does it feel to know we succeeded? Kim looked out at the peaceful plaza one more time before responding. It feels like we can finally go home. The galaxy was ready to govern itself. Humanity's long vigil was coming to an end, and their greatest achievement wasn't the war they had won, but the peace they were leaving behind.